Oleg Gordievsky, KGB colonel, and the West's most valuable penetration of Moscow, risked execution the night he handed over a briefcase. Inside was evidence that destroyed the myth of Soviet nuclear invincibility. Suddenly, US leaders realized their enemies' warheads could fail. Their silos were brittle, and their command chain was already cracked. What happens when Washington gets proof the Soviets are bluffing and decides to strike first? This single betrayal would shatter decades of Cold War certainty. At 2:11 in the morning, the secure line at the Western Intelligence Station came alive. A tall man, face tense and pale, stepped through the reinforced glass doors, clutching a battered leather briefcase. The night duty officer caught the glint of KGB insignia on the man's lapel just before the alarms triggered. Within seconds, the station's emergency protocol snapped into place. Blast doors sealed, the outer lobby was swept for surveillance devices, and the visitor was escorted to a windowless interview room under armed guard. The man identified himself as a senior officer. His accent and official documents checked out, but the name he gave did not appear on any local watch list. The briefcase stayed locked on the table, handcuffed to his wrist. Two security officers began the rapid chain of custody process, photographing the case and logging the exact time of transfer. The station chief, roused from sleep, arrived in less than 15 minutes. Every movement was recorded. The air in the room thickened as the defector recited code phrases known only to high-level KGB insiders. The initial sweep for radioactive traces and chemical markers came up clean, but the threat level remained at maximum. The station's encrypted channel flashed red. Washington and London were alerted. No one asked why he came, not yet. The priority was containment. Isolate the asset, secure the documents, and verify his story before the morning shift arrived. The man's hands shook as he keyed in the combination to the briefcase. Inside, the first glimpse was folders marked Top Secret, stamped with dates and signatures from Moscow's highest offices. The chain of custody, now airtight, would follow every page from this room to the highest levels of command. Oleg Gordievsky's career in Soviet intelligence had been built on loyalty and discipline, but years stationed in the West had left deep cracks in his faith. He wore the uniform of a KGB colonel, but the world he moved through in London felt less like an enemy outpost and more like an answer to questions that had haunted him since Prague in 1968. The invasion then, the tanks rolling through city streets, had been his first taste of the regime's true nature. Later, as the KGB's man in Denmark and then Britain, he saw the gap between Moscow's propaganda and the freedoms of the societies he was sent to undermine. His access was nearly unrivaled. As deputy resident in London, he received cables stamped with the signatures of Politburo members. His briefings included not just lists of Western targets, but internal assessments of Soviet vulnerabilities, details that only the most trusted hands would ever see. Yet trust for Gordievsky had become a burden. The more he read, the more he questioned the system's survival. He later wrote in a diary fragment that they fear the West's strength, but fear their own weakness more. Pressure inside Moscow was suffocating. Advancement meant total submission. Even a hint of independent thought could freeze a career. At home, his family lived under constant surveillance, a reminder that any misstep could cost more than his own life. When the call came to return to Moscow, the warning was clear. Someone suspected too much. The decision to walk in was not a leap, but the end of a long, slow fall. Every page in his briefcase was a piece of the world he could no longer defend. Each secret was a reckoning, proof that the system's greatest threat came from within. Folders stamped with the KGB's highest level of secrecy lay open on the table, their covers heavy with signatures and urgent red markings. The first document, dated November 5th, 1982, carried a heading, Strategic Rocket Forces, Operational Readiness and Reliability. Inside, entire paragraphs were blacked out, but the visible lines told their own story. References to anomalous detonation events during recent missile tests and a table of launch failures flagged for immediate review by the General Staff stared back. The margins were crowded with handwritten notes, some in blue ink, others in a hurried scrawl, all initialed by officers from the Ministry of Defense. Another folder held an engineering summary stamped "For Politburo Eyes Only." Its diagrams traced the wiring of command relays from Moscow's Central Command to the missile regiments. A single schematic labeled C2 Failure Cascade mapped the points where a severed cable or a missed code could halt a launch sequence. In the lower corner, a warning in bold Cyrillic read, "Single point failure risk unacceptable." The page made clear where a single fault could produce cascading failure across an entire battalion of missiles. A third file, thinner and more battered, contained a maintenance log from a missile silo complex outside Omsk. The top sheet, marked with a faded, urgent stamp, listed repeated faults in silo blast doors and power feeds. Several entries noted repair delayed, awaiting parts. One line, underlined twice, read, "Manual override procedures untested." The notes pointed to crews stretched thin, spare parts trapped in bureaucratic limbo, and systems left vulnerable at the worst possible moments. Each page, each note, stripped away the illusion of Soviet invulnerability. Here, the arsenal was not a monolith, but a patchwork, systems straining under pressure and reliant on overworked crews and aging equipment. The gravity of the cache was unmistakable. This was not abstract intelligence. These were the vulnerabilities the Kremlin never admitted, now laid bare in the hands of their adversaries. Inside the Joint Strategic Target Planning Staff, the new intelligence triggered an immediate, methodical review. Analysts pored over the Defector's documents, comparing handwritten notations and technical summaries with the latest satellite imagery and intercepted telemetry. Within days, the match rate between the Soviet maintenance logs and US overhead reconnaissance exceeded 90%, a level of confidence rare in Cold War intelligence work. The SIOP targeting matrix, once built on estimates and worst-case assumptions, now absorbed real data. A revised aim point table, stamped with the date and the initials of the targeting chief, recalculated the number of warheads needed to neutralize specific Soviet silos. In the margins, a single note said counterforce feasibility increased, and it carried more weight than any public statement ever could. As the technical teams ran their simulations, the numbers shifted. JSTPS computers, fed with new vulnerability parameters, projected that a first wave could disable a significant portion of the Soviet land-based arsenal before a retaliatory order could even be transmitted. The language in the NSC memo grew sharper. The memo read, "Window of vulnerability confirmed. Option read, execute on warning." Yet not everyone in the war room accepted the logic of opportunity. The ethics advisor, invited by the National Security Advisor to review the findings, raised a single page. She said, "This intelligence changes the map, but it does not change the law or the line between deterrence and aggression." Her voice cut through the technical jargon. "If we act first, even with perfect information, we cross from defense into preemptive war." The room split. Targeting officers argued that the new data could save millions if used decisively. Others warned that exploiting a secret weakness, even in the name of security, risked triggering the very catastrophe it aimed to prevent. The president's initials appeared beside a question. Is knowledge of vulnerability a shield or a temptation? The debate, now frozen in the redacted memo's margins, would shape every alert, every exercise, and every decision that followed. Within hours, orders swept through the Soviet command chain. Security Directorate teams fanned out to missile regiments, launching a full-scale intruder hunt across 12 strategic rocket bases. Engineering brigades worked through the night, welding new armor onto silo-blast doors and rerouting exposed power feeds. The Ministry of Defense issued a classified directive. All launch crews were ordered to rehearse manual override drills twice daily, no exceptions. By dawn, a revised missile test schedule landed on every commander's desk. 5 new launches were set for the next 30 days, each one monitored by Politburo observers. In Moscow, the KGB's Internal Affairs section opened hundreds of personnel files, searching for the next traitor before he could act. Debate over the Defector's legacy remains unsettled. Some historians argue his revelations tipped the balance toward a more dangerous arms race, fueling American confidence in a winnable nuclear exchange. Others see his actions as a force for stability, exposing the myth of Soviet invulnerability and making reckless escalation less likely. Published assessments from the 1990s through the 2010s reflect this divide. One scholar writes, the information narrowed the margin for error, but widened the field for doubt. The question of whether he averted disaster or merely shifted its shape endures. Nuclear secrets still shape global power, but true vulnerabilities rarely reach daylight. As new rivals rise and arsenals modernize, the world's next crisis may hide behind another myth. The Cold War ended, but the shadow of uncertainty remains. What would we do if today's truths came to light?